Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. This class began last year, and we're continuing our study of Psalms. Last year, we managed to get through the first 16 Psalms, and all of those recordings are available if you want to go back and learn some of the Psalms. One of my favorites is Psalm 8. When I say one of my favorites, what I mean is Psalm 8 is a psalm that I had underappreciated until this class. So if you were just going to go back and listen to one of the recordings just to see what we've been doing, the one that I would pick is Psalm 8, because that one I felt like I really learned a lot about that psalm. And this morning we are going to learn Psalm 17 together. One thing that I wanted to mention is that Psalm 18 is our first really long psalm. It's 51 verses, and I haven't decided whether it's going to take us one session or two sessions. So far, we've had a one session, one psalm kind of approach, but Psalm 18 is particularly long, and I just don't know that we'd be able to do it justice in one session. So it's possible that we'll be doing Psalm 18 for the next two meetings of our class. But today, Psalm 17. So we start by reading the psalm in Hebrew, and then we'll also we'll read some of the translations. When we read it in Hebrew, if Hebrew isn't your native language, or if you don't understand, part of what we're listening for is repeated words or repeated sounds. We're trying to get a feeling for what the psalm does emotionally, and some of that it can be understood just through the sound of the psalm itself, right? This is poetry, ancient poetry, spiritual poetry, but also poetry. So we'll start by reading Psalm 17 in Hebrew. Tefillah LeDavid, Shim'a Adonai Tzedek, Hakshiva Rinati, Ha'azina Tefilati, Below Siftei Mirma. Milfanecha Mishpati Yetze, Einecha Techezena Mesharim. Bachanta Libi, Pakadta Laila, Siraftani Bal Timtza, Zamoti Bal Yavor Pi, Lifulot Adam Bidvar Sfatecha, Ani Shamarti Orchot Paritz. Tamoch Ashurai B'maglotecha, Bal Namotu Pe'amai. Ani Kiraticha, Chi Ta'aneni El, Hat Oznecha Li Shema Imrati. Hafle Chasdecha, Moshiach Chosim, Mimit Komimim Biminecha.
Mark, yeah. I can't get any sound.
Tishon Bat Ai, Bitzel Knafecha Tastireni, Mipnei Rishaim Zu Shaduni, Oevai Benefesh Yakifu Alai. Chelbamo Sagaru, Pimo Dibrot Bigeut, Ashurenu Ata Sivavunu, Einehem Yashitu Lintot Baaretz. Dimyonu Ke'arye Yichsof Litrof, Vechichfir Yoshev Bemis Tarim. Kuma Adonai Kadma Fanav, Hachri Ehu, Palata Nafshi Meirasha Charbecha. Mimtim Yadcha Adonai, Mimtim Mecheled, Chelkam B'chayim, Utzvuncha, Timale, Bitnam Yisbeu Vanim, Vihinichu Yitram Leolehem. Ani Bitzedek Echeze Panecha, Esbe'a Behakitz Timunatecha. All right. Mark and Barry, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. I am glad to hear it. All right, so that was the Psalm 17 in Hebrew. It's challenging Hebrew, and also you can tell I'm not used to reading this one out loud. This psalm is not one of the psalms that has a lot of liturgical references to the Jewish tradition, and we'll talk about the liturgical connections in a little bit. Can I ask somebody to read the translation of the Jewish Publication Society, the JPS translation? This is actually an updated version of the Jewish Publication Society's translation, which just came out this year. All right, let's see. I hadn't shared my screen, but now I have.
You're supposed to see it. I can't even see it.
Marcia, can you see it?
Not too well.
Is there?
Oh, that's better. Yeah.
Great. All right. Marcia, would you like to read it?
Okay. A prayer of David. Hear, O eternal one, what is just? Heed my cry, give ear to my prayer, uttered without guile. My vindication will come from you. Your eyes will behold what is right. You have visited me at night, probed my mind. You have tested me and found nothing amiss. I determined that my mouth should not transgress. As for mortal stealings, in accord with the command of your lips, I have kept. I lost it a minute. I have kept in view the fate of the lawless. My feet have held to your paths. My legs have not given way. I call on you. You will answer me, God. Turn your ear to me. Hear what I say. Display your faithful. Which line is it? Display your faithfulness and wondrous deeds. You who deliver with your right hand those who seek refuge from assailants. Guard me like the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings from the wicked who despoil me. My mortal enemies who encircle me. Their hearts are closed to pity. They mouth arrogance. Now they hem in our feet on every side. They set their eyes roaming over the land. They are like a lion eager for prey.
Very top. A king of beasts.
A king of beasts lying in wait. Rise, O eternal one, go forth to meet my enemies. Bring them down. Rescue me from the wicked with your word. From mortals, O eternal one, with your hand. From mortals whose share in life is fleeting. But as to your treasured ones, fill their bellies. Their children too shall be satisfied and have something to leave over for their young. Then I, justified, will behold your face and awake for what is that? I can't see that. I'm sorry. I am filled with vision of I am filled with a vision of you.
That's it. All right. And let's read one more translation. I'm gonna read this one from where is it? Here, this one. This is the translation of Rabbi Richard Levy. A prayer of David. Hear our justice, Adonai. Pay attention to my ringing cry. Give ear to my prayer from lips without deceit. From your face itself let my judgment come. Let your eyes behold my uprightness. You have probed my heart. You have paid me visits in the night. You have tested me in the furnace, finding nothing, no wicked plots concealed by my mouth. As for human actions that are contrary to the word of your lips, I have guarded myself against violent ways. Hold my steps fast to your pathways. My feet have not faltered. I have called out to you, for you respond, God. Incline your ear to me. hear out my word. Let your covenantal love do wondrous things with your right hand, delivering us who take refuge from those who rise up against us. Protect me as though I were the pupil of your eye. Find me a secret place in the shadow of your wings, from the face of wicked folk who want to ruin me, my mortal enemies who are closing in on me. Their fatty parts have shut them in. Their mouth is swollen with arrogant speech. Now they have swarmed around our steps. They have fixed their eyes on us to cast us into the earth. They look like lions panting after prey, like cubs poised to pounce from their lairs. Arise, Adonai, set your face against them, cast them down. Let your sword save my life from the wicked. Send your hand against this gang of brutish men, whose portion is only in this life, whose bellies you stuff with your treasure, whose houses are stuffed with their children, who leave to their babies what's left. As for me, I would look upon your face through justice. Would that I might be stuffed with images of you as I awake. Does anyone have any feelings or responses, first reactions to this psalm?
To me, it sounds like something you'd see on Truth Social.
Something you'd see on Truth Social. Mark, what do you mean by that?
It sounds a lot like our former president complaining about all his enemies out to get him.
Okay, so the psalmist is definitely complaining about all the enemies that are around, and so it is in some sense a psalm of complaint, a psalm of the tone of it might have some aspect of maybe whining a little. Yeah. Does anybody else have a reaction, an immediate reaction? Murray.
Well, to me, I have a slightly different reaction to it as a supplication in beautiful poetry to begin with. And also, the King David seems to be setting himself up as the righteous, the true follower of God. And he realizes that not all those around him are, let's say, friends or friendly, and he wants protection for his righteousness in administering his duties as king.
All right, so it's a prayer. It's a psalm of supplication, says Murray, and there's definitely the reality, which is that not everyone is on the same page as David with respect to relationship with God. All right, other thoughts? Yeah, Gary.
The superscription is different here.
Great.
It's, all right.
Yeah, what do you notice about that?
It's described as a prayer rather than a mizmor.
Yeah, right. So we've seen a whole bunch of psalms that begin, Mizmor LeDavid or just LeDavid, and this one says Tefillah LeDavid. What is the difference between a Tefillah and a Mizmor or a Tehillah? And why do you think this one feels different in that? Do you have does this feel more like prayer, Gary, than some of the other ones that we've read?
I didn't have that feeling. I was guessing that the difference between a prayer and a psalm is how it gets used. That somehow a psalm is more public and a prayer is more private, something like that.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, that is, I love that thought. I do think I do think that there's a real question here about why it feels why David describes this psalm as a prayer. It might just be that the superscription follows up on the fact that in the first line, David says, "Pay attention to my ringing cry, give ear to my prayer," right? Give ear to my prayers from lips without deceit. So David references this, self-describes it as a prayer, and then whoever put in the superscription followed David's description. So I think that might be part of it too. Alter says, this is one of several times in Psalms in which tefillah, prayer, is used instead of the anticipated mizmor, psalm. The generic distinction is not clear, because this poem is essentially a psalm of supplication. The speaker is beset by enemies who threaten to destroy him as he entreats God to confound his foes and rescue him. Perhaps the note of inwardness in the first part of the poem, in which the speaker proclaims the integrity of his prayer and his having met the challenge of God's probing, are what qualify this text as a prayer. So Alter kind of agrees with you, Gary, that it's about this sort of inward sense, and that there isn't necessarily something specific in the form or content of the psalm that we can point to that says, yes, this is why this is called a prayer instead of a psalm.
I did have one over. The idea of someone beset by enemies who are deceitful and are saying bad things about them, I think has come up a few times before in the Psalms.
That's
and
right.
To me, it gives a sense of what sorts of things were on people's minds a few millennia ago. That's the kind of thing that they were worried about and that they saw as a very serious threat. And in some ways, I don't think we share that sense of being beset by people who are telling lies about us, something like that.
Well, so that's an interesting thought, because I was about to I was about to ask, to follow up from what you just said, whether you feel like we still feel beset by lies around us. Does anybody feel that, like, in the last few weeks, that you're beset by lies around you? Natalie, you have to unmute.
Okay. I have stopped watching news because you can't tell what's true and what isn't anymore. And the lies are everywhere, not only from political people, which you listen to Santos for 2 minutes and you've got 12 lies, but you can't trust anyone who's telling you anything anymore. There were a few people that you thought you could, but when push comes to shove, they just as soon lie to get out of a situation. And I think many times people don't realize that they're lying anymore. They've heard something so often that they just accept it as truth. And it makes it very hard for people who are really looking for the truth to find it.
Yeah. So Natalie says, yeah, clearly a couple millennia ago, they were worried about deceit and enemies who would lie to you. And also now there's a sense of despair with respect to a social expectation of basic truth telling and basic agreement on facts in the public sphere. And now it's gotten to the point where maybe we can't even tell who's telling the truth and who isn't, because people who are telling terrible lies think they're telling the truth. And that's a real moral quandary. But there's something in this psalm that really speaks to that same emotional feeling. Now, Gary, you said that you're not sure that people worry about deceit as much anymore. And I'm curious to know, like, what does it feel like for you to hear what Natalie is saying? And did you think about it like that? And in what way do you sort of feel like, no, people are telling the truth?
I think that Natalie is right. And as I was saying that I don't think it's as big a concern. Somehow that didn't include the last few weeks.
Yeah. So I guess what I hear from you is that you've lived a life where basically in most of your interactions with people, you have had an expectation of truth telling, and that has basically been your experience of the world. Like, you do not go around in the world talking to people and thinking, was that person lying to me? Right? And I think that probably most of us agree with that general feeling that uh that that in most situations we are not engaging with people who are deliberately trying to deceive or mislead us in the way that David describes his enemies in this psalm. And yet there are definitely times where we do feel that, where we do feel a sense of deception, a sense of deliberately being misled, and certainly a sense of despair around the truths and lies in the public sphere. Murray.
Well, my only observation here is that I think it's the beginning, the period of time here is a little bit too narrow. This atmosphere of issue of truth telling and finding out the truth goes back many decades, even to World War II. And so it has been, how shall I say, steadily proceeding, like perhaps like a storm, until it may reach a crescendo at a point where we have gotten used to it, to hearing it, and try to let's say avoid the dissonance and not even listen anymore. But we still try to find the truth in spite of what was going on.
Natalie. Wait, you have to unmute. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm talking about the current situation. We know what's been happening for decades and decades. Most people believe the things they hear, have believed the things they hear. But when you have a major network that millions of people listen to that are telling you lies, even though they know now that we now know that they knew they were lies. I'm talking about Fox News. It's been proven that they knew they were lying, but they keep these lies up, and people believe what they hear on the station they want to listen to. And it's very hard to change their opinion because they're just going to say, well, I heard it on this broadcast. Why would they not tell me the truth? It's really hard to figure out anymore who you can trust and who is lying deliberately and who is lying by accident because they don't know, or they're just repeating something they heard. And once you say, oh yeah, well, I heard it here, it had to be true, or I read it in the newspaper, why would they not tell me the truth? So I think we're now much more aware that the things we hear and read can be lies, and it's hard to find the truth.
Yeah.
Somebody.
So, this question of the characterization of the poet's enemies as deceitful and liars and is something that a lot of the commentators talk about. Here's one. The cruel characterizations of the poet's enemies in this psalm may discomfort us. It may be easier to internalize the messages of this psalm, as in others, by looking at the enemies not as external to ourselves, but as manifestations of our own Yetzer Hara that always tries to seduce us into stuffing ourselves with the products of the material world, excess food and drink, inappropriate erotic attractions, buying binges, envy of others who have what we think we want. In that sense, every time we find ourselves drawn into a lair of material excess, we might imagine that these grotesque images describe what we are doing to our neshamas, to our souls, fattening them up, creating more distance between them and the God who created them and who longs for their closeness. So there's I think that's sort of responding in some ways to the comment that Mark made right at the beginning, that this psalm has a tone of being a very strong tone with respect to these enemies. And so one way that Rabbi Levi, for example, says that we should respond to that is maybe by thinking about the enemies as internal to us as opposed to external. The conversation we've just been having about whether people in the world in fact are deceiving us, and do we experience the world as being full of lies and liars, is an external way of reading it, right? Sort of the most basic way of reading this psalm, which is there are a lot of external threats. There are people out there who are trying to lie to us, and so it's interesting to think about what it would look like, or what the psalm would feel like if you thought about it as internal liars, the ways in which we lie to ourselves. I'm going to read the psalm again, another translation, and as I read through, think about this. Do you think that it's more external or more internal, the enemies that David describes? So that's one question, and then another question is, what is the answer that the psalm gives us to this question of lies and the lying? The enemies. Is there an answer? Does the psalm give us an answer? So I'm going to read this time the translation of Rabbi Eli Kashtan. A prayer of David. Hear, Lord, my righteous cause. Listen to my cry. Give ear to my prayers from lips without deceit. Let my judgment come forth from you. Let your eyes discern what is right. Were you to test my heart and watch me all night long? Were you to try me as in a furnace? You would not find me innocent. I wish that my mouth had not transgressed. With regard to man's activities, being mindful of the command of your lips, I have protected others from the ways of the lawless. My steps have held firmly to your paths. My feet have never faltered. I call on you, for you will answer me, God. Turn your ear to me. Listen to my words. Favor me with your compassion, you who rescues those who seek refuge from your opponents with your right hand. Guard me like the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings, from the wicked who do me violence, from my deadly enemies who encircle me. Their fat has enclosed their hearts. Their mouths speak nothing but arrogance. They track our steps. Now they surround us. They set their eyes to throw us to the ground. They are like a lion, hungry for prey, like a young lion crouching in ambush. Arise, Lord, confront them, bring them down. Save my life from the wicked who act as your sword. I prefer to die at your hand, Lord, among those who die of old age, whose portion is life, and whose bellies you will fill with your hidden treasures. May their sons have plenty and have something to leave over for their offspring. Then I, in righteousness, will behold your face. When I awake, I shall be content with the vision of you. So from my perspective, that translation has a completely different feeling to it. I don't know whether other people also felt that. Mark.
What stage was David's life when this was supposedly written?
Yeah, so the this psalm like some of the other psalms is understood to be like written by David at a particular point in David's life, but I'm not sure exactly what that is, for whether this one has any particular, right? Psalm 18, which we're going to look at next week, that one specifically has like a moment that it is based on. This one I think is more general. I'm not sure that it has a particular.
I just kind of wondering if it was later in his life, if he had a chance to accumulate all these enemies, or whether he's early in his career and is slightly paranoid.
Murray?
Continuing Mark's point of view, David on his way to the throne was no particularly saint. He too had committed various acts, and even when he reached the throne, perhaps even worse. But he has gone through a period in life and has gone through a transformation. And now he believes that he is in a position to do the right thing. But there are enemies who still want to bring him down. So here's a supplication, and I think it's an eternal one rather than external, saying, I'm finally here. I want to do the work that needs to be done, but I need your guidance and your help, God.
So Murray definitely sees the internal aspects of this struggle. The translation that I just read, the commentator writes, this psalm formulates the dilemma confronted by every sincere person of faith as they begin to pray. They feel desperate. Their problems are insoluble. They need God to hear their prayers. But they are hampered by their own awareness of their own sinfulness. They refuse to believe that they are worthy of God's attention. Why should God listen to the one who prays? We are convinced that our faults prevent us from obtaining God's favor. So there's a way in which, if this is the internal enemies, the real struggle is relating to God and having that connection. Does Mishka, are you? Nope, you're muted.
No, that was just petting up the cat.
Got it. Did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, because I really kind of missed couldn't get Zoom to cooperate and really missed the beginning. So I'm catching up hearing this.
All right. Lisa.
Okay, I'll take a stab at this. I'm new at this, and I'm new at learning in this way, and particularly looking at the Psalms in this way. So, but I do appreciate the question about whether this is an internal situation or external. And so thinking about it in that way, thinking about it from the point of view that it was an internal conversation, it sounded to me as if he sounds faithful. It doesn't sound as though his faith is wavering or he's questioning his faith, but I did have this feeling of bargaining. If you do all of these things, then I will approve. And I can relate that to myself, this kind of conditional approval I have of myself. If I'm doing X, Y, and Z, then I'm happy with myself. If I'm not living up to these expectations that I have of myself, then I'm not happy with myself. So thinking about it from that point of view, um, it also made me think about the enemy. Is it my perception that I'm not doing, or is it my perception that everybody is against me, or in reality, or am I really being followed, or do I just think I'm being followed? Where's the line between me and you? Where's the line between my experience of myself, and how does that impact the experience that I have out there? So at the same time, I can say, I'm in charge of my perceptions. I can also very much relate to my perceptions and the connection to what I see out there. So I don't know if that made any sense, but that's what I got. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing and for engaging with this deep question, right? Which we've looked at with some of our other Psalms also, of whether are they internal enemies or are they external enemies, right? And I think the answer, not that there has to be an answer, because it's poetry, but I think the answer is yes. That is to say, the psalmist imagines both internal and external enemies. That and when we think about enemies as just, if we only think about enemies as sort of physical enemies, then we miss the opportunity to also see the way in which we are our own enemies sometimes, and which there are parts of us that work to self-sabotage. And in our relationship with God, right, and these Psalms, especially this one, which calls itself a prayer, but all of the Psalms, these are spiritual attempts that ancient Israelite people had of connecting with the divine, and they speak so deeply to our struggle with what it means to be in relationship with God. Larry, it's so good to see you.
Hello, I'm sorry to be late.
That's okay.
Business nailed me down here. Boy, this is a really tough one. It looks like a Rorschach, a mental Rorschach, depending upon where you put your frame. You are either guilty or not guilty, but in any case,
yeah, I think you're right about that, and the translations reflect that. Some of the translations, right, in the first few verses of the Psalm, where it says, "You have visited me at night, you probed my mind, you have tested me and found nothing amiss. I determined that my mouth should not transgress," right? That's the Jewish Publication Society, right? The Christian Standard Bible says, "You have tested my heart, you have examined me at night, you have tried me and found nothing evil. I have determined that my mouth will not sin." That's very, very similar. That's why I put those next to each other, because they often agree in terms of the translation. But in the one that I read just now from the Koren Tehillim, Rabbi Eli Kashtan, "Were you to test my heart and watch me all night long, were you to try me as in a furnace, you would not find me innocent. I wish that my mouth had not transgressed." And so that one, it clearly falls on the other side, right? Where it's a prayer, like I tried to not transgress, but alas, like I did in fact sometimes fail at that. And so I think that that's a very interesting question of where is the guilt in this, is it my fault, is it enemy's fault? Yeah.
it seems to be almost a spiritual plane and a natural plane, flipping back and forth between them. that at the spiritual level, I yearn to be like this, yet at the natural level, I'm afraid I am like this. And that echoes all the way through it, even at the end. And he concludes it, as for me, he's saying, I know I'm doing this in a dream, because his last line is, as I awake, that I want to be stuffed with images of you. Whatever all this is good or evil in me or in them, all I want, Lord, is you. It's almost like the mourner's Kaddish. Instead of praying for the souls of the dead and so forth, God, you are omniscient, omnipotent, you are holy. Whatever you do, Lord, I'm with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't deserve anything. And I may be just as guilty as those awful people with fat hearts.
Right. And sometimes we are, right? And sometimes we are. And certainly Murray had pointed out that I think it was Murray, that King David didn't lead a perfect life and sinned. And so David knows very deeply what it is to feel that he is a sinner in addition to being righteous, right? There's both in David's experience of the world. So I'd like to look a little bit at the liturgical uses of this psalm. And so there aren't that many. This, like I said when I first read it in Hebrew at the beginning of the class, this psalm doesn't roll off the lips for me, because it doesn't have the same liturgical usage. Some of the psalms I know by heart. This one I did not. But there are a couple of really important connections. One is in verse 8, the second half of the verse, B'tzel knafecha tastireni, hide me in the shadow of your wings. That phrase is used in our daily Mariv service every single day. In the second blessing after the Shema, the Hashkivenu blessing. I'm going to read the translation here. Allow us, Adonai, our God, to sleep peacefully. Awaken us to our life, O sovereign. Spread over us your canopy of peace. Restore us with your good counsel and save us for the sake of your name. Shield us, remove us from enemies, pestilence, sword, starvation, and sorrow. Remove the evil forces that surround us. Shelter us in the shadow of your wings. Uvetzel knafecha tastirenu. Right? And there it is made into the plural, but it's a quote from this psalm that's just adapted from the singular tastireni to the plural tastirenu. And so in the prayer, we're asking God to shelter all of us, as opposed to in the psalm where the psalmist is asking for a personal shelter. But that is three words which we say every single day. So those three words are very, very commonly used in our liturgy. Gary.
I think the same phrase comes up in El Melech Rachamim.
Yes. To
be sheltered under the shadow of the wings.
Yeah. That's right. The idea that we ask that we ask God to protect the souls of our family members also uses very similar language. So the reference in the first half of verse 8 to Ishon bat ayin, the apple of the eye, that phrase is used in some versions of the bedtime Shema prayers. So my own personal custom is just to say the Shema and the Ve'ahavta before bed, and not to say all the prayers that surround it. Sometimes, or at some points in my life, I have also recited the last stanza of Adon Olam, the stanza which is about finding that sense of faith in being in God's hands. but many Sidurim have a whole liturgy that goes with the bedtime Shema, and one of the most common versions of that liturgy quotes this verse, the verse that describes Ishon Bat Ayin, the apple of the eye. This phrase is also brought into English. I think Shakespeare uses it, like quotes this particular. I'm not 100% sure on this. I didn't look it up, but I think that this phrase "apple of the eye" is used in English literature. Maybe I'll go and look that up. So the other connection that is a liturgical connection is from the last verse, the verse 15. There's a custom to publicly do the priestly blessing on holidays. And in Israel, there are some who have the custom of doing it every day. And for people who have that custom, which is called duchening, or where the priests go up onto the bima, or the duchan, the platform, to bless the people, that ritual has so basically there's the service leader says word by word the words of the priestly blessing, and the priests repeat it. So the leader is supposed to say it quietly so that only the Kohanim can hear, and then the Kohanim say it loudly so that everybody can hear. And since it's word by word, a custom developed of reciting certain verses. Like if you're a participant, if you're just a person receiving this blessing, there's a custom that certain verses that are related to that word, you can say them after you hear the word. So it's kind of like an intertextual midrash. It's like when you hear the word Ya'er, illuminate, or, then you can recite a bunch of other verses that all have or that have the concept of light as part of them. And so this verse, the verse 15, then I, justified, will behold your face. Awake, I am filled with the vision of you. That is one of the options of verses to say when referencing God's face, because it says, I will behold your face. So when the priests say, Ye saw Adonai Panav. So when they get to Panav, God's face, God's countenance, may God shine your countenance upon you, right, and grant you peace. So one of the verses that you could recite is this verse. I will behold your face. I'm filled with the vision of you. And I think it's powerful to think about the intertextual way in which that verse is now being seen as part of this priestly blessing. That what does it mean, in fact, for God's countenance to shine on you? It means for you to have this sense of connection filled with the vision of God, right? That and it goes back to what Larry was saying, right? The psalmist wants to wake up in accordance with God's will, in connection with God. And so what that blessing is being seen to do is to deeply connect to that sense of God's face. So I did want to share this Talmudic interpretation of this psalm, which I found as I was studying it. And it's from Bava Batra. It is related that Rabbi Elazar would first give a pruta to a poor person, and only then would he pray. He said, as it is written in this verse, I will behold your face through tzedek. So that's our verse. That's the verse 15, the end. Then I, with tzedek, will behold your face. Justified is how one translation has it, but righteousness, tzedek, right? So that is and of course we hear the connection between tzedek and tzedakah. Ani b'tzedek echazeh panecha, right? So the Talmud, the word tzedek appears twice in this psalm, right at the beginning and right at the end. Right at the beginning in verse 1, Shim'a Adonai tzedek, hear Lord my righteous cause. Right, what I'm saying to you is righteousness. It's true. It's tzedek. Okay, and then right at the end, Ani b'tzedek echezeh panecha, I with righteousness, with tzedek, will see your face. So the rabbis of the Talmud, such as Rabbi Elazar, understood verse 15 of our psalm to mean that one first must give tzedakah, and then one's prayers will be heard. A simple act of righteous giving renders one's cause righteous. This practice is incorporated into Jewish law, right? And here's a quote from the Shulchan Aruch, where it says, it is well, or you should, give a coin to the synagogue's tzedakah pushke before each prayer, as it is written, as for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness, or with charity, with tzedakah. So, what do we this verse 15, it doesn't just have a spiritual meaning. It actually is a verse that is used by Jewish law to describe a particular practice. And that practice is the practice of connecting tzedakah, righteous giving, with tefillah, with prayer. And I don't think it's this goes back to our question of what makes this psalm a tefillah instead of a mizmor. Why is the superscription a tefillah David, a prayer of David? I don't know exactly why this one is called that, but I don't think it's an accident that the rabbis of the Talmud and the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Yosef Karo, tie this custom, this practice, this mitzvah of giving tzedakah before each prayer, right? When you come to shul on a weekday, you should put a little something in the pushke, right? To tie your daily act of prayer to a daily act of righteousness, to a daily act of good deeds, to an action that shifts the world, right? I don't think it's an accident that they tie it to this psalm, which is described as a prayer, right? That there's a deep connection there between this idea of righteousness and this idea of giving. What one way to understand this is self-recrimination and guilt can be alleviated with an act of charity. Our psalm encourages the remorseful and self-doubting man or person of faith to, in spite of being riddled with despair and discontent, you can dispel those feelings with an action. You can awake and become content with the vision of an attentive and responsive God by being attentive and responsive to the needs of those around you. And so I asked whether you felt like the psalm had an answer to this question of the enemies, whether they're internal or external, that beset you. I think the answer is in this word, tzedek, the righteousness, that the answer to self-doubt, the answer to external liars, the answer to those who would try to deceive you or to bring you off of God's path, right? The answer is to have this sense of righteousness, both in terms of what you say and what you how you perceive yourself, and also perhaps more importantly, in your actions. That doing tzedakah makes a huge psychological difference in your sense of self-worth. And I'll close with this description, spiritual applications from Rabbi Richard Levy. He says, just as we need to work to balance the poverty and oppression and violence in the world with acts of tzedakah in all of Maimonides' rungs, with acts of compassion and peacemaking and work for a just society, so too in our own personal lives do we need to work for a balance of appropriate satisfaction of our appetites with equal amounts of restraint and generosity. This battle with our spiritual and societal enemies is a life-strong struggle, and a psalm like this can remind us that these enemies are personal ones, that they threaten us and those we love as much as the men by whom the psalmist feels personally pursued. Send your hand against this gang, we need to cry out daily. That is, strengthening our hand through prayer and meditation and disciplined action, tzedek, to save our lives from the great power we ascribe to their foes. Any final thoughts or reactions?
Would end it.
Natalie. You have to unmute. Natalie, you have to unmute. We can't hear you.
Mute.
There you go.
Okay, I take this not as anyone or David is waking up from an actual sleep. I take this as people waking up to what's happening around them and how they can continue in their lives being more aware of how to reach the divine and just be awoken, to be woke, in fact, in today's terminology, to what's happening around us. You don't it's not a real sleep, it's a virtual sleep for society.
Yeah. I will say I wasn't going to necessarily mention it, but since you asked this question of whether it's a real sleep or a metaphorical sleep, I will say that this last line is so sensuous in the Hebrew. It is so to be filled, right? To be sated, right? It's the same word as ve'achalta v'savata, right? That you should eat and be satisfied. There's a way in which, so esbe'ah behakitz timunatecha, I will be sated in my waking by your tmuna, by the sight of you, by your picture, by what you look like. That verse actually was used by Jewish poets in the medieval period to write erotic poetry. That this so there's something very, very very sensuous about that phrase, and so is it real sleep or is it metaphorical sleep? Either way, there's a sense of that the depth and sensuousness of that connection that you have when you wake up lying next to someone, when you wake up filled with sated by the feeling of connection with that person or entity or God. Yeah, Larry.
It also emphasizes the importance of ritual, that the physical acts we do are integrally related to our mental and spiritual state. There's a unity to everything. To just be a monk who just prays in an abstract is not what's called for here. It's recognize, live in the world and recognize it, yet at the same time make your life and ritual be one. That you're constantly putting symbols in front of yourself, and actions that you take are changing you, are reinforcing the spiritual, and the relationship between the physical and the actual and the spiritual and the potential just seems to be so clear in this psalm. It really is a work. The struggle is part of it, of the output.
Nice. All right, so I'll just say what I said again at the beginning, which is that next week we're gonna do Psalm 18, but Psalm 18 is the first of our really long psalms. There's 51 verses. And so I haven't decided yet whether it's gonna take us more than 1 week to read it. So far, we've done one class, one psalm, but it might be that to really do Psalm 18 correctly, we need more than one class period. So we'll see how it goes next week and how my preparations go. But I'm glad we're back together and learning Psalms together. And I hope that these Psalms can be a source of spiritual nourishment for us, whatever kind of enemies we have in our own lives. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.